think it's hard when you're the last in a series of presentations. You know, everyone's sat down for an hour or so. So I actually thought I would change what I'm going to talk about. And what I thought I'd talk about is why most of the firms that you guys work at or will work at are going to fail. And I'm going to talk about how to work out which are the ones that are going to fail, how to the ones that are going to fail from the ones that aren't. And if you happen to be unlucky enough to be one of those ones that's going to fail, maybe some things that you could do about it, other than obviously quit. But the starting point for me is regulation. And I was asked I did an interview with the Evening Standard last week on, because it was the 30th anniversary of Big Bang in the city. And that was before even my time in this industry, but the basic idea of it was to bring the trading world into the 20th century to make it easier to buy, sell, own financial instruments of all sorts of different types. And yeah, through electronification and so forth. And 5 or 6 years later, you had the repeal of Glass-Steagall in the US, which again was all about how do we remove the friction in the whole trading landscape. And then a decade or so after that, we had something called MiFID, which originally was set about, again, do the same thing. Make it as easy to buy and sell Vodafone if you're sat in Milan or Paris or Athens as it is in London. And what you saw was a continual bunch of regulation that was all geared around reducing friction more and more and more. And inevitably when you do that, eventually you slip over on a great big banana skin, and that was the global financial crisis. And a lot of people blame the banks, the evil banking empire, for the GFC as it's become known. And in fact, that's something I talked about last time, and I made a case for the defense of the banking industry. But the point is that the politicians said to the regulators, you've all been asleep at the wheel, what are you doing? We've got to change this. And the regulatory agenda overnight completely changed from removing friction to a punishment agenda of how do we extract some divine retribution from these bastards who drove the economy off a cliff nearly, and how, more importantly, do we make sure it never, ever happens again. And the way that they decided to do that was to make the industry uniform, utilitarian, and highly transparent. And it didn't matter that people that knew what they were talking about went to regulators and said, you do know that the fixed income market doesn't work anything like the cash equities market. And they said, no, we don't care. You fix it out. We want it all working the same way. And so the problem that creates is historically so many firms have grown up in this industry, they just kind of fell into it and have found a way to make a living. You can't do that in the industry as it is today. And the analogy I thought of is if you think of the food industry. Now, really the point I want to make is that you've got to be really, really clear now, moving forwards, what is the industry that you're in and who you're serving and why. And there's different ways of doing that. So again, come back to my food analogy. You could be, and I don't happen to eat in McDonald's, right? But you have to admire the way they take herds of cattle, fields of potatoes, and turn that into 99-cent cheeseburgers that are the same all the way around the world. The technology is brilliant, to the point that to work in McDonald's, it's a minimum wage job. But why couldn't broking be a minimum wage job? Or you could go the other way and become Heston Blumenthal and have all your dry ice and blowtorches and everything. Or you can be somewhere in the middle and be Pizza Express, a solid, consistent dining experience for families, you know, on a Wednesday evening or whatever it is. And the reason that most companies in this industry, who are in this industry now, aren't going to get that It's something that I've talked about before, and it's called the innovator's dilemma. And the most famous example is Kodak. The one that is actually my favorite and resonates with some of what John was saying about Markets Wiki is Encyclopedia Britannica. That existed back in the 70s, 80s, and every household or middle-class household in England had proudly in their living room, dining room, Encyclopedia Britannica. For those of you who don't know, it was 15 leather-bound volumes with a sort of gold thing around the edge, and it contained all the knowledge you needed. And in 1985, Bill Gates knocked on the door and said, how about I take your Encyclopedia Britannica and put it on one of these things, a CD-ROM? And the Encyclopedia Britannica guys said no. And the reason they said no was because they felt that the penetration of PCs in families was pretty low. And also they felt that by putting it on a CD-ROM, it would denigrate the beautiful leather-bound books and brand that they had. And in 1990, Encyclopedia Britannica was worth 490 million pounds, which back then, still a lot of money now, but back then was even more. By 1995, they were completely bankrupt. And actually, it wasn't Bill Gates that killed them, because he went off and did his own thing within Carter, but he got killed by Wikipedia. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that so many firms are so engrossed in solving the very short-term, immediate, and short-sighted needs of their immediate customers, they simply don't get the big change that's going on. And I think if you're going to be getting what some of those big changes are about and really understand, you've got to understand what innovation really is. And a lot of people would say that innovation is about those kind of eureka moments. Aha, I've discovered something, I've invented something. And yeah, that is true. But actually, more often than not, it's a much more collaborative process. And there's a guy I was lucky enough to meet called Steve Johnson. He writes a really cool book called Where Good Ideas Come From. And he uses the example of the Renaissance period in Europe, which was the time that sort of bridged the Middle Ages to what we know as the modern world. The greatest advances in science, literature, medicine, everything. And he traced it back to the introduction of the coffee house. Because before then, before people drank coffee in coffee houses, what they used to do is just get drunk on gin. They were just pissed out of their brains on gin all the time. And when they went into coffee houses, suddenly you had all sorts of different people, A, sober, but B, coming from all sorts of different walks of life, cross-pollinating each other's ideas. And it's that which is the real key thread to innovation, is bringing together different sorts of people with different experiences. And so many firms don't do that, because in order to work, they have to put everyone into vertical silos to organize them. And one of the recent experiments that we did at Fidessa is we created and built our own internal messaging system, our own chat system, not because we don't think WhatsApp is good, or Skype, or WeChat, or whatever, they're all great. But we wanted to build our own one. Let it loose in Fidessa and see what would happen. And we have 1,700 employees, and within a month, we put one intranet article out about it. Within a month, over 1,000 were using it regularly. And as you go down the demographic of the firm, from the old guys to the younger guys, almost 100% of the new people are using it. And they're using it for all sorts of, whether it's to get together in the evenings, or because it's integrated in with the Fidessa world, and it's open APIs and stuff, they can build all sorts of their own applications to check on change controls or bits and pieces that are going on in their work lives as part of it. But the nice thing is that you're getting people who are coming from all sorts of different departments thinking collaboratively about how to be more innovative. And I think yeah, just to end perhaps on one final story is, and I ask this a lot of people when within Fidessa, is everyone can tell you what their job is, and quite a few people can tell you how they do it, but a much smaller percentage can tell you why. And whatever job you're doing, in whatever your first job is, if you're not understanding why you're doing what you are, I'll put my hand up, go and see my boss and say, excuse me, why the hell am I doing this? What's the point? Whose life am I making better and why? Because if he doesn't know or can't answer you, then you're probably one of those firms that isn't going to be around in the longer term. And if they can't, then you know, go find out. Or don't do a job that doesn't have that kind of rationale behind it. Anyway, I'm about out of time, so I'm going to shut up there because I normally go on too long. But thank you for your time and attention. Cheers.